New generations may not have been exposed to mission, and new Christians are not familiar with mission. So you see all of these negative vibes that are already existing, that we have to combat and overcome. Some reasons to foster a high missions profile are that missions are an important priority of the church. People understand things to be important if they look important. It is a natural part of the normal Christian life. We sometimes unintentionally devalue missions. So, again, what we emphasize is basically what we're going to get a response to. If we're all the time promoting a youth program, we're going to get a response to that. And people are going to get behind that. People are going to recognize it and value it. And its skyline or its profile will increase, not only to the local body, but even in the community. Same with missions. If you give it a good, respectable skyline, it'll be elevated in the minds and hearts of people. What you put quality to, people respect and people value. That's why, I saw it again today. I love your new sign. It looks good. Things like this may seem so elementary, but man, I'll tell you what, they really speak to the community, because it says to the community that you're a quality place. It says that you respect what you're doing here and what God's doing here so much that you got a really good looking sign. How many times you drive by a church and you look like grandma painted a sign, with their eyebrow brush or something. I mean, it's, or sometimes one day you can tell 80 years ago they had a nice sign. Now, what you can read of it, you have to read it through all the peeled paint off of it and the cracks in it. And again, it communicates something to people. Think about it. I know for me, I wouldn't be as likely to be attracted to a church where the front of the church was all run down, the sign was hanging off the, halfway hanging down and crooked. And I'd go, I'm not even sure they still have church there. But they probably do. That's the way most churches a lot of times are. So what do? We want to raise that skyline. Amen. Some reasons to foster a high missions profile. Missions are an important priority in the church, obviously. People understand things to be important if they look important. So we covered that, didn't we? Some ways churches unconsciously undervalue missions. We neglect to bring missions and missionaries before the congregation. People will value what we put in the pulpit because people see this place as a sacred place. They see this place as an important place. And so anybody we let get in this place, we attribute value or worth to. And so they will see it that way. We neglect to pray for people in the turbulent international news. We tend to relegate it to certain times of the year. We overwhelm people with guilt or bore them with poor presentations. We may do shoddy missions promotion. We sometimes focus on the inconsequential things like the cockroach stories. We tend to make missions trips a commodity. Some ways to raise the profile through communication. You can show the overriding priority of God's work and the hope of His promises. Show how a missionary effect relates to the challenges or the growth of Christianity in the world. Make the connection between a particular missions activity and a larger strategy. Excuse me. Show the context of missions work. Pray fervently for those on the front lines. Portray hope. Celebrate success. It works wonders to show people what good their giving is accomplishing and doing somewhere. Or to tell them about how God's moving in other places. Because it encourages them. People want to feel like if I'm contributing to something, what am I getting back in return? Well, when someone comes along and says, hey, I can tell you that this many people were saved. I can tell you that we fed these pastors, and then we taught them all day long how to be good pastors and how to feed their sheep and how to care for their sheep and how to build their church and what Jesus says about this and what Jesus says about that. Then people say, hey, you know what? I feel like that was a good deal. That was a good bargain. And they're going to be more apt to support the next thing the missions committee brings forward or shares with the congregation. So returning with reports and good news is very important and very essential. Some principles for raising the profile. Work to overcome our cultural tendencies towards self-focus. Increase the number of missions activities and the frequency of missions communications. Leverage the pulpit and short-term missions, which tend to have the highest visibility. Have you ever noticed, I'll give you a good example, most churches, and you probably do this, I don't know if you do or not, But most churches are obviously and rightfully so real big on youth ministry. And we'll support youth ministry, and we'll work hard to make it good all year. And then we'll have to raise money to send our kids to camp. And you'll see churches just really get behind that. And the kids will go to camp, and the kids will come back fired up and excited and ready to go for God. And what do most churches do? Immediately, the immediate time they come back, they put those kids in the pulpit and let those kids tell about what Jesus did and how they experienced the presence of God and how they got saved or how they got the Holy Ghost. And boy, they just excite the whole congregation. Well, you know what? What you're doing, you're raising the skyline of youth ministry. And the next year when they come around and the youth pastor or the church pastor says, hey, guys, we need to raise some money to send these teenagers to camp. You don't even have to say, remember their testimonies last year. Immediately, a light goes off in people's heads. Hey, last year I gave $25 to that. Man, kids got saved. Those kids were on fire. They were so excited. Hey, I want to get on board this year. That was a worthy endeavor and investment. And so you do the same with missions. You do the same with any type project or program you have in the church. Because it just adds to the excitement, and it raises the opinion in the minds of people of its importance. Missions-minded church. Missionary wrestler Dean Turner, y'all know him? In his training manual, Missionaries in the Local Church, a study guide, gives the following insight on becoming a world-class church. He says, we've all heard the numbers before, but they are so eye-opening that I want to share some here with you. He said 15 years ago in the United States, there was a minister of the gospel for every 535 people. Now, I need to say this. I wrote this in 2007. So if Dean says 15 years ago, this is 22-year-old information, okay? But it's still relevant. Y'all know what I'm saying? Relevant to help us at least get a perspective. He says 15 years ago in the United States, there was a minister of the gospel for every 535 people. More ministers are in the United States than any other country. Other lands cry out for ministers. India had only one minister for every 1 million. Asia only one for every 80,000. It seems many want to go to Africa these days, and yet Africa has more ministers next to the U.S. than many other lands with one minister for every 18,000. Japan had one minister for every 83,000, while Latin America had one for every 55,000. The need is still great. He says, I am sure the percentages haven't changed that much since then. So, I took that quote from Dean's manual that he had given me back in the day, and because it was, of course, at least it communicates, gives you an idea of what's going on. I know it's a little outdated now. So what is a missions-minded church? According to Ames, the following items are used to define a mission-minded church, or what we often call a world-class church. In the church's giving, at least 10% of the church's total budget is dedicated to missions. Now, they recommend 25%. But for most churches aren't even giving 3%. So if you can one day get up to 10%, that's a pretty good sizable, part of your budget right there. However, I wouldn't take condemnation if you can't, because I always believe this about when it comes to giving. Giving is giving. God sees your heart and your willingness, and the more you sow seed, the more seed you're going to have to sow. It's the way it works. So, set a goal. One day we want to believe God to give 10%. If you can give 10% today, that's great. Give 10%. And then believe to give 20, or something, though. The church is committed to faithful intercessory prayer for those who have not yet had the opportunity to hear the gospel and respond to it. In ministry, 10% or more of all adults in the church are actually engaged in cross-cultural ministry. That meaning short-term missions, local cross-cultural outreach. And I'm sure that is still pretty effective or relative. In mission service, 2% or more of all adults identified as career missionaries and or tent makers. That includes in training and those already deployed to the field. So, what would 10% be of a local church? What would 2% be of a local church? You'd have to determine the size of your church. In effectiveness, the missions-minded church is committed to fulfilling Jesus' command in Acts 1:8. They are reaching their own city, which is Jerusalem, their general geographic area, Judea, nearby cross-cultural peoples, Samaria, unreached peoples, the uttermost parts of the earth, all at the same time, and in the power of the Holy Spirit. and the power of the Holy Spirit. This four-part outreach should not be seen as and understood as an orderly process of reaching your own city first and then reaching out to the other areas afterwards. Rather, it means that a church is working simultaneously in all four areas in order to complete the church's mission. There's some steps that we can take towards being a mission-minded church. There are several of these: imparting vision to the congregation, encouraging them to use their energy, time, resources, and spiritual gifts for reaching the world; organizing and harmonizing members for a unified strategy in the reaching of the world; evaluation of the strategy and process to ensure productive results that glorify God. Here's some steps that you can look over if you want to spend the time to do that. The first step is the spiritual preparation for the senior pastor and the church leader. Spiritual preparation for the church is needed as well. This can begin with daily prayer for the world, resources such as Operation World. That's the book I was trying to think of a while ago. It's a real good book to give if you want to get into a missions vein of ministry and things. It's Operation World is a daily prayer guide created by Patrick Johnston to help individuals pray for needs around the earth, and that can really help you a lot. It's very well respected and very highly used. You can buy, if you don't want to pay the money for a new one, you can buy an old one, like on Amazon, for probably a penny, because they update it. I don't know if it's every year or 2 years, but they update it, and which gives the most current statistics. But you're going to have all the other information won't change, because they're still who they are, and all the details. So either way, you would want to go on that if you're interested in getting one. But anyway, then secondly, you want to ask God for His vision for your work to become a missions-minded church. And you can do that by making short-term mission trips overseas. This helps you in your vision and focus. You can begin to be prayerful and well thought out in choosing partnerships with missionaries. Consider a church planting church, growth and multiplication strategy in your surrounding area, your Judea. This can be done by your church alone or by networking with other churches to accomplish this. Each church should have a Bible-based discipleship course or program. If there's not one already, I recommend to you to begin one. Whatever material you choose should help each member discover his or her spiritual gifts. Begin a church-wide prayer focus. Prepare using Operation World as a guide. You can take those Operation World and just make a copy of whatever people group you want, or if you want to take it by the date or something, and put it on the overhead even on Sunday morning, just so that it's there when people start coming in. And just by that, it serves as a reminder to pray and think about a particular people group. Missions implementation. Missions implementation involves different things. There are several items to consider, especially those which you don't have in place already. Develop a missions policy. We talked about this, so I'm not going to spend any time on it. Appoint a missions pastor or director. We've talked about this. We've talked about appointing a committee. Develop a missions training program within the church. This is something that I can almost guarantee you, if you said we're going to start once a week or once a month having a missions training program, if you think you might be interested, come. You'll have people that you'd be surprised that'll show up. Some maybe are just curious, but and they'll go through your program, and however long your program is, and you'll be surprised what'll come out of that as far as people's passion and desire to be a part of missions, because they'll get excited. And they'll feel like they have something to contribute if they've been trained in that area. Hold an annual missions conference or a series of missions emphasis services. You can do the funnest things. Something that we did usually every time we had a banquet when I pastored, we would also incorporate in that a meal, and we would have food from different countries. And we'd usually pick out 3 or 4 countries, because, depending on how many people how many people you think you're going to have. But then we'd have, a couple ladies for each country volunteer to get together and prepare this meal. You get recipes off the internet and stuff, and we'd have a Chinese meal, food. We'd have Mongolian food. We'd have maybe like Samoan, Hawaiian type food, Polynesian or something. And then we might have something like a Brazilian steak. Brazilians they're real big on their Brazilian steakhouses or something like that. And the people loved it. And we did it two different ways. One time we had it to where the people had to register ahead of time and choose the food they wanted. And so they could, that way we knew how much to prepare, and we sat them in by tables. In other words, if there was 15 people wanting Chinese food, then the Chinese food would be placed kind of family style on that table, and we'd have 15 chairs. And the next table would be Brazil, and we'd do it like that. So we knew what to prepare. And another time we did it on a more casual way, where people actually, we would have a table, a food table, kind of like a buffet, and the food would be on the buffet, and behind it they decorated the wall, looked like Chinese decorations behind it. So this was the China table, for example, and we had them on 4 different walls, and then the tables, you could sit anywhere you wanted. And so if you wanted Chinese food, you go here. If you wanted this, you go over here. And we did that too. So we just had 2 different ways we did it. You can take and you can choose just if you want to just represent one country that year. Maybe you just want to say, this year we're going to honor Mexico, And so you decorate the whole dining room in some type of little Mexican-looking, colorful decorations, and you cook tortillas or something, tortillas, tacos and tamales and things like that. So you can really create your own idea, and of course, you can make a banquet out of it. Maybe have a banquet speaker for the night, just one person. If you want to go with a missions conference, you might have an all-day event where you can serve food or not serve food. But what I did on a lot of if I would have a missions convention, I would invite missionaries, and I would choose maybe 4 missionaries that I knew that we wanted to support or already supported, and ask them to speak. So I'd have 4 different missionaries, maybe 2 in the morning, 2 right after lunch. And I would usually ask my worship team to do all missions-related songs that day and stuff like that. You can do different stuff. Some churches have a monthly mission service. And for some of them, all that means is they take up a missions offering, and they mention missions, and that's really all they do. And then some churches have a monthly mission service where they actually either bring in a missionary, or the pastor preaches on missions, or the missions committee maybe does a little skit or a presentation of some kind. So guys, you can be creative, and have a lot of fun with it, and it really will get people excited. People will love it. It's fun. We have had we've invited the people to all dress up in the clothing of different countries. And so we had people go into Dallas and buy Indian clothes and all kinds of different stuff, because they thought it was like a party, And people come dressed in the different clothing of the different nations. And it's good because people say, well, what nation are you representing? And they'd say, well, I'm representing Saudi Arabia or something, And here's what they believe, and so it makes a lot of fun, and it can really help your congregation get on board with missions. Plan short-term trips. You can take a trip just for young people or just for adults. You can take a trip for anybody. In other words, you can take types of trips. You can take a missions trip, a medical missions trip where you treat children, wounds, you can visit orphanages, you can visit a church in another country, or you can visit multiple churches. You can visit a Bible college in another country. You can go to hospitals in other countries. You can just go down into the inner city streets and pray for people, and you'd be amazed at the response that you'll get. It's awesome, and some countries are more receptive than other countries are. So you also might consider that when you're taking your group. How much training have they have? How receptive are they? And you might want to take your inexperienced people to somewhere where it's easier to win souls. Some nations, it's almost like picking fresh fruit off a tree. They've been waiting for somebody to show up. And then some nations you go into, and the police are watching you, and all kinds of stuff. So you just have to, do a little research and be prepared for it. Don't be overwhelmed by all the different suggestions today and the ideas. These are just a plethora of ideas and suggestions. And you can just pick and choose and be led of the Lord and have fun. Missions in the worship services, we talked about that. Communicating missions through media, the arts, weekly worship services, all kinds of things we can do with that. You can use video presentations, dramas, skits, displays, banners, flags. Anything you want to use, you can use. Home missions. Most of us know what that is. That's missions to our own nation and our own communities and all of that. And so that is very much a part of missions as well. Bringing the nations to church every Sunday. So keeping missions alive as an intricate part of the weekly gatherings is accomplished by finding ways to include local ethnic groups in various aspects of the service. For instance, in our church, we spotlight different ethnic groups on a weekly program. Well, I told you we did that. You know, my assistant pastor was from Namibia, and he would get up to take the offering and pray, and every Sunday we would highlight a different people group from the book that I was telling you about. Yeah, I already forgot the name again. Operation World. Yeah. And so the people would get excited. Boy, they'd pray for that nation. And we would usually do it the same people group for a month. Is the way we did it. But you can do that however you want to. So what we did, we didn't necessarily literally bring the nations to church. We brought them to church by way of praying for them, mentioning them, giving a little brief bit of information, and that way the people would experience those nations in some fashion, and it would help them be able to pray better. Missionaries are born in the local church. It's Christian people that God calls to serve Him in the nations, and so I would just be aware of that and expect it all the time. Amen? Now, the next section is what I was talking to you about. It's special event planning and implementation. The rest of this booklet or manual, basically, with the exception of a little short section here on the Antioch church, most of the rest of this is just lists, forms, and things like that can help you plan some missions endeavors, projects, banquets, and things like that. So it's just a resource tool for you. It's really not too much teaching left in here in that respect. There is a little bit, but most of it's not. And so I'm not going to go over that. And pretty much I even got through this last part faster than I thought I was going to. So that concludes our lesson for this month.